I didn't kiss him because I loved him. I kissed him because I didn't want to watch a man die on my shift. Don't move, I whispered against his lips, feeling the frantic heat of his skin against my cold hands. He didn't pull away. He didn't even blink. He just stared at me with eyes that looked like they'd seen the end of the world and survived it. That's the moment I need you to understand first. Not because it was the most romantic second of my life, but because it was the most dangerous. Not even close. 3 minutes before I grabbed his collar, a glint of steel in the VIP shadows had told me the rules of the night had just changed. I was just the girl refilling water glasses, but I was the only one who saw the Reaper coming. I was standing by the velvet ropes when the air in the room shifted. That's the detail that stuck. Not the pounding bass of the house music. Not the smell of expensive cigars and desperation. It was the silence. A pocket of unnatural quiet that followed Ryu Sung-ho as he walked in, like the world held its breath so it wouldn't get in his way. I had $18 in my pocket and a daughter sleeping at a sitter's 2 miles away. I wasn't looking for a hero. I was looking to survive 4 more hours without breaking a tray. Then the shadow moved in the corner. Hey, besties. Welcome back to the channel. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now let's get back to the takedown. Ryu Sung-ho sat at table 9 wearing a suit that cost more than my apartment building, his jaw set in a line of pure, unadulterated iron. He was untouchable, polished, a kingpin who moved through the city like he owned the oxygen we breathed. He didn't look at me when I set the bottle down. He didn't look at anyone. That was his mistake. Behind him, emerging from the dark like a ghost, was a man with a silencer and a look of practiced indifference. 3 years of working this floor, 3 years of learning to read the eyes of men who think I'm invisible, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. My brain screamed to run, to hide, to let the monsters kill each other. Instead, I did the one thing that would ruin my life. "Sir," I said, my voice steadier than my heart. He started to turn, right into the line of fire. I didn't think. I grabbed the lapels of that expensive black wool, pulled him down, and pressed my mouth to his. He went rigid, cold. I could feel the tattoo on his neck vibrating with the sudden surge of his pulse. "Stay still." I breathed into the kiss, watching over his shoulder as the gunman hesitated, confused by the sudden display of intimacy. Ryu's eyes stayed open. They were intense, suspicious, and beautiful in a way that felt like a warning. For 5 seconds, the most powerful man in the city was mine to hold. And just like that, every struggle to pay the rent, every night I'd spent hiding my daughter's existence, every time I told myself I was just a waitress, it all blurred into one terrifying reality. I had just saved the devil, and now, he wasn't going to let me go. The air outside the VIP lounge was cold, but my skin felt like it was on fire. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I turned around, I might see Ryu Sung-ho's eyes following me. Or worse, I might see the man with the gun realizing he had been tricked. My heart was a drum beating against my ribs, loud and fast, as I pushed through the heavy kitchen doors. The kitchen was a blur of silver pots and the smell of roasted meat. The other cooks didn't even look up. To them, I was just another girl in a stained apron finished with a long night. I reached my locker with shaking hands. I pulled at the strings of my apron, the fabric knotted and stubborn, until it finally gave way. I tossed it onto the floor. I didn't want the smell of that casino on me anymore. I didn't want the memory of that kiss or the taste of expensive wine and danger lingering on my breath. I grabbed my old, faded denim jacket and pulled it over my shoulders. As I reached into my pocket for my keys, my fingers brushed against something small and plastic. I didn't realize it then, but a small, green toy dinosaur tumbled out of my pocket, bouncing silently onto the cold tile floor. I was already moving, bursting through the back exit and into the narrow alleyway. Then the sirens started. They were distant at first, a low wail that grew into a scream as police cars and ambulances raced toward the front of the building. The sound made my stomach twist. In a city like this, sirens meant someone's life had just changed forever. I had to make sure it wasn't mine. The rain was coming down in sheets now, thick and gray. It soaked through my hair and chilled me to the bone, but I welcomed it. The rain was a curtain. It hid my face. It washed away the sweat of fear. I ran 3 blocks down to Mrs. Gable's apartment, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Mrs. Gable was old and slept with the TV on too loud, but she was kind, and she was the only person who knew about Lily. I pounded on the door. When it opened, the warmth of the small room hit me, along with the smell of cinnamon toast. Lily was asleep on the sofa, her small thumb tucked into her mouth, a messy pile of blocks at her feet. "You're early, Amelia," Mrs. Gable whispered, adjusting her glasses. Then she saw my face. She saw how wet I was and how my hands wouldn't stop trembling. "Something happened. I just need to go," I said, my voice cracking. I scooped Lily up into my arms. She was warm and heavy, smelling of baby shampoo and sleep. She stirred, blinking her big, dark eyes at me. "Mama," she mumbled. "I've got you, baby. We're just going for a walk," I whispered against her hair. I handed Mrs. Gable a crumpled $10 bill, half of what I had left in the world, and stepped back out into the storm. I didn't go to the bus stop. The buses had cameras. Instead, I walked. I took the back streets, the ones where the streetlights flickered and the shadows were deep. I stayed away from the main roads where the black SUVs with tinted windows usually prowled. Every time a car splashed through a puddle behind me, I jumped. Every time a shadow moved in a doorway, I gripped Lily tighter. I felt like a ghost haunting my own city. I knew that back at the casino, Ryu Sung-ho was probably standing in the middle of a crime scene, surrounded by bodyguards and blood. He was a king and I was nobody, but I had touched the king. I had tasted his secret, and I knew he wasn't the type of man to let a secret walk away. By the time I reached our tiny basement apartment, my boots were full of water and my legs felt like lead. I locked the door and slid the heavy bolt into place. I didn't turn on the lights. I sat on the floor with Lily in my lap, listening to the rain drum against the high, narrow window. I was safe for now. The city was huge, filled with millions of people and thousands of girls in aprons. There was no way a man like him could find a girl like me in all this gray. But as I looked down at Lily's peaceful face, I remembered the way Ryu had looked at me during the kiss. His eyes hadn't been closed. He had been memorizing me. He had been marking me. I shivered, and it wasn't from the cold. I had saved his life, but as the sirens faded into the night, I realized I might have traded my quiet life for something much darker. I was gone, but in the world of men like Ryu Sung-ho, no one ever truly disappears. The safe house was too quiet. It was a cold, clean room hidden deep inside a building that didn't exist on any map. The walls were painted a dull gray, and the air smelled like sharp chemicals and old rain. I lay on a leather sofa, my eyes fixed on the ceiling. Every time I tried to close them, I felt the ghost of her hands on my collar. I felt the soft, desperate pressure of her lips against mine. "Sir, please. We need to check the wound on your shoulder." I didn't move. A man in a white coat stood over me, holding a tray of silver tools. He was one of the best doctors money could buy, but right now he was just a nuisance. I pushed his hand away. The movement sent a sharp spike of pain through my arm, but it was nothing compared to the fire in my head. "Not yet," I said. My voice sounded like gravel grinding together. "But the bullet grazed you, Mr. Ryu. If we don't clean it." I said not yet, I snapped. I sat up slowly, ignoring the way the room tilted. My neck was tingling. It wasn't from the cold or the injury. It was the spot where her breath had hitched against my skin. It was a mark she had left behind, more permanent than any tattoo. The door opened and Min, my most trusted scout, stepped inside. He looked tired. His suit was wrinkled, and his shoes were caked with the mud of the city. He bowed low, but he didn't speak. He knew I didn't want excuses. I wanted a name. "Where is she?" I asked. Min swallowed hard. "Sir, the casino was a mess. The police arrived within 4 minutes. The staff ran in every direction. We checked the employee logs for the VIP lounge, but the girl at table 9, she isn't on the list." I felt a surge of anger that made the machines in the room beep faster. What do you mean she isn't on the list? She was wearing the uniform. She had the tray. She knew exactly where the shadow was hiding. She was a fill-in, Min explained quickly, his voice shaking. A double shift worker from the main floor who covered for a friend. The manager doesn't even know her last name. He just calls her the ghost because she never stays to talk after her shift. I reached up and touched my lips. They were dry now, but the memory was still wet and frantic. She had saved me. She had seen the red dot on my chest that my own bodyguards had missed. She was a waitress with a stain on her apron and a secret in her eyes, and she had played me like a professional. Find a manager, I ordered. Bring him here. I don't care if you have to buy the entire casino to get the security tapes. I want every frame of her face. I want to know where she buys her bread. I want to know who she talks to when she thinks no one is watching. Sir, the doctor really must, Min started. I stood up, the pain in my shoulder blooming like a dark flower, but I didn't care. I walked over to the table where they had placed the items found at the scene. Among the glass shards and the spilled wine sat a small, green plastic dinosaur. It looked ridiculous sitting next to my gold watch and my heavy handgun. It was a toy for a child. I picked it up. It was cheap, the kind of thing you win in a grocery store machine or buy for $1. It felt heavy in my palm. She's a mother, I whispered. The realization changed the game. She wasn't just running for herself. She was running for someone else. That made her brave. That made her dangerous. And it made her much easier to break once I found her. I turned to the doctor, finally letting him see the blood soaking through my shirt. You have 10 minutes to patch me up, I told him. And tell the men to get the cars ready. We're going to turn this city upside down. I don't care if she's hidden under a mountain of gray. No one touches Ryu Sung-ho and disappears. The doctor began to work, but I didn't feel the sting of the needle. All I felt was the throb in my neck and the weight of the dinosaur in my hand. I had a fever, but it wasn't from the wound. It was the obsession. I was the king of this city, and I had finally found something I didn't own yet. I wouldn't stop until I saw those terrified, beautiful eyes again. I wouldn't stop until I found out why a girl who had everything to lose had risked it all for a man like me. The doctor worked quickly, his hands shaking as he stitched the skin on my shoulder. I didn't feel the needle. My mind was back in that alleyway, back in the rain. I was looking at the small green dinosaur again. It sat on the table under the bright lights of the safe house. It looked so bright and happy, which was strange because the room felt so dark and cold. I'm finished, sir, the doctor whispered. He stepped back and bowed. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and picked up the toy. It was made of cheap plastic. The green paint was peeling off the dinosaur's tail. It was the kind of toy that had been played with for a long time. It had been dropped, chewed on, and loved. I turned it over in my fingers. In the palm of my hand, it felt like a heavy weight. This wasn't something a professional assassin would carry. It wasn't something a rich woman would have in her pocket. This was a piece of a different world. A world of small apartments, loud buses, and counting pennies for milk. Min, I said, my voice low. Look at this. Min stepped closer. He looked at the toy and then at me. It is just a toy, sir. Probably left behind by a guest. No, I said, shaking my head. The guests at the Emerald Room don't bring their children to the VIP lounge at midnight. And they certainly don't buy toys from grocery store vending machines. This fell out of her pocket when she ran. I closed my eyes and remembered the way she looked. Her hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, like she didn't have time to look in a mirror. Her apron had a small stain on the side. She wasn't a girl looking for a thrill. She was a girl working 2 jobs because she had to. She isn't an angel, I muttered to myself. She's a mother. The thought made my chest feel tight. Every woman I knew was either trying to get my money or trying to stay away from my shadows. But this woman, she lived in the parts of the city where the streetlights stayed broken. She was struggling to survive, yet she had used her own body to shield me from a bullet. She had risked leaving her child alone in the world just to save a stranger. Sir? Min asked. What do we do now? We change the search, I said. I stood up and pulled my shirt over my bandages. The pain was there, but I pushed it down. Stop looking for high-end apartments. Stop looking for people with records. Search the daycares that stay open late. Search the cheap grocery stores near the casino. Look for a woman who looks tired. Look for someone who is hiding a child. I looked at the dinosaur one last time. I could almost see her in a small, dark room, holding a little boy or girl, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She thought she was safe because she was poor. She thought she was invisible because she was just a waitress. She thinks she can disappear into the gray, I said, a small smile touching my lips for the first time. But she left a trail. She left her heart in this plastic toy. I put the dinosaur in my pocket. I could feel the sharp edges against my leg as I walked toward the door. The hunt was no longer about a woman who kissed me. It was about a mother who had a secret. I wanted to see her face when she realized that the king of the city was standing in her doorway. I wanted to know what else she was hiding. Let's go, I told my men. The city is big, but she has nowhere left to run. I have her clue, and soon I will have her. By the next morning, the city felt different. It was heavy, like the air before a giant storm. I stood by my small, cracked window and pulled the curtain back just an inch. Down on the street, 2 black SUVs were parked at the corner. They didn't belong in this neighborhood. They were too clean, too shiny, and too scary. Men in dark suits stood near them, watching every person who walked by. They weren't looking for criminals. They were looking for me. I turned away from the window, my heart thumping hard against my ribs. On the small table, Lily was eating a bowl of plain cereal. She was happy, humming a song she had heard on the radio, totally unaware that the world outside was closing in on us. I sat down next to her, trying to keep my face calm. I didn't want her to see the fear that was making my hands shake. The news on the small TV was filled with stories about the security lockdown in the district. They called it a safety check, but I knew better. Ryu Sung-ho had turned the city into a trap. My friends from the casino were calling my phone, but I didn't answer. I had seen the messages. Ryu's men were going from restaurant to restaurant. They were auditioning every waitress who worked the night of the shooting. They weren't asking for resumes. They were looking at hands. They were looking at height. They were looking for a woman who knew how to disappear into the shadows. They were lining up girls in back rooms and staring at them, waiting for someone to blink or look guilty. Every time I thought about it, I felt the ghost of that kiss again. It had been 5 seconds of madness, and now it was going to cost me everything. I looked around our tiny room. It was filled with Lily's things, a pile of drawing paper, a one-armed doll, and the empty space where her favorite green dinosaur used to be. My stomach dropped. I realized then that I had dropped it. I had dropped the one thing that connected me to this room. If Ryu found that toy, he wouldn't just find a waitress. He would find a mother. He would find Lily. I stood up and started grabbing our things. I stuffed a few clothes and Lily's favorite blanket into a backpack. I couldn't stay here. If the black SUVs were already at the corner, it was only a matter of time before they started knocking on every door. "Mama, where are we going?" Lily asked, her big eyes looking up at me. "Is it a game?" "Yes, baby," I whispered, forcing a smile that felt like it was breaking my face. "It's a game of hide and seek. We have to be very, very quiet." I looked back at the window. One of the men in the suits was looking up at the building. He was holding a phone to his ear, his face as hard as stone. He looked like a wolf catching a scent. I grabbed Lily's hand and moved toward the back door, the one that led to the dark alleyway filled with trash. The net was closing. Ryu Sung-ho was a man who never lost, and he was hunting me like I was the most important prize in the world. I wasn't a queen or a rival. I was just a girl who had tried to do something good. But in Ryu's city, no good deed went unpunished. I stepped out into the cold shadows, praying that the gray of the city would hide us just one more time. Chapter 5. As I pulled Lily through the narrow back alley, my mind raced back to a time before the casino, before the fear, and before the silence. I looked down at Lily's small hand in mine. She had her father's fingers, long and steady. She had his eyes, too. Dark, deep eyes that seemed to see right through you. 5 years ago, I wasn't a waitress hiding in the dark. I was a girl in love with a man named Gene. Gene was kind and funny, but he had a secret that he kept tucked away in his heavy black jacket. He worked for Ryu Sung-ho. He wasn't a leader or a boss. He was a soldier, one of the many men who stood in the background and made sure the city stayed under Ryu's thumb. Gene used to tell me that Ryu was a man of honor, even if that honor was covered in blood. He looks out for his own, Amelia. Gene would say, sitting at our small kitchen table. If you're loyal to the organization is loyal to you. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the money he brought home to pay for our tiny dream was safe. But in that world, loyalty is a dangerous thing. 3 years ago, when Lily was just a baby, Gene didn't come home. I waited by the window until the sun came up, watching the streetlights flicker and die. 2 days later, a man I didn't know knocked on my door. He didn't say much. He just handed me a thick envelope of cash and Jin's watch. He died protecting a shipment, the man had said, his voice as cold as ice. Mr. Ryu sends his thanks for his service. That was it. My daughter's father was gone, turned into a thank you, and a stack of bills that smelled like gunpowder. I realized then that Gene was wrong. Ryu didn't look out for his people. He used them until they were broken, and then replaced them. I took the money and moved across the city. I changed my name. I worked every job I could find, determined to keep Lily away from the shadow of the men in black suits. I never wanted Ryu Sung-ho to know we existed. I never wanted my daughter to be a soldier in a world that didn't care if she lived or died. But now, the past was catching up. The man I had hidden from for years was the same man I had saved in the casino. Fate was playing a cruel trick on me. If Ryu found out who I was, he wouldn't just see a waitress who kissed him. He would see the widow of one of his fallen men. He would see a child who belonged to his organization by blood. In Ryu's world, once you belong to him, you never truly leave. He would take Lily. He would turn her into another piece of his empire. The stakes weren't just about my life anymore. They were about her future. I stopped at the end of the alley, my breath coming fast. The memory of Jin's smile felt like a ghost haunting me in the rain. I had spent 3 years running away from Ryu Sung-ho, only to run right into his arms to save his life. I looked at Lily, who was shivering in her little coat. I couldn't let him find us. I couldn't let him take the only thing I had left of the man I loved. Come on, Lily, I whispered, my voice thick with a pain I hadn't felt in years. We have to go faster. The secret history I had buried was screaming to be heard. Every black SUV that passed us felt like a reminder of what happened to Gene. I wasn't just a girl who knew a secret. I was a woman holding a piece of Ryu's own world, and if he found out, he would never, ever let us go. We weren't just hiding from a stranger anymore. We were hiding from a man who thought he owned our souls. The rain had slowed down to a cold mist, but the air still felt thick and dangerous. I hurried Lily toward the old bus station at the edge of the district. My plan was simple: get on any bus heading out of the city and never look back. I kept my head down, pulling my hood low over my eyes. I thought I was being careful. I thought I was watching for Ryu's men and the black SUVs. But I was so busy looking for the wolves I knew that I didn't see the different kind of monster waiting in the dark. We were crossing a quiet street behind a row of empty warehouses when a silver car pulled up silently beside us. It wasn't one of the heavy SUVs Ryu used. This car was sleek and thin, like a snake. The window rolled down, and a man with a jagged scar across his chin looked out at us. He wasn't wearing a neat suit. He wore a leather jacket and had a smile that made my skin crawl. "You're a hard person to find, Amelia," the man said. His voice was oily and slow. I didn't stop. I gripped Lily's hand tighter and walked faster. "You have the wrong person," I said, my heart starting to race. "I don't think so," he laughed. He hopped out of the car, and 2 other men stepped out from the shadows of a nearby doorway. They moved like hunters, circling us so we couldn't run back to the main road. "Ryu Sung-ho has been turning the city upside down for you. He's obsessed. He's even looking for a little green dinosaur. Does that sound familiar?" My blood went cold. This wasn't Ryu. If it were Ryu's men, they would have taken me with a cold, quiet strength. These men were messy. They looked at me with a hunger that had nothing to do with protection. "Who are you?" I asked, pulling Lily behind my back. She was trembling, her small fingers digging into my jacket. "The name is Kong. I'm the guy who is tired of Ryu running the city," the man with the scar said. He stepped closer, and I could smell the sour scent of old cigarettes on him. "Ryu is weak right now. He's distracted by a pretty face and a memory of a kiss. He thinks he's playing a game of hide-and-seek, but I'm playing for keeps." I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake. By saving Ryu, I had made myself a target for everyone who hated him. Kong didn't care about Jin's history or my struggle. He didn't even care about the kiss. To him, I was just a piece of meat he could use to lure Ryu into a trap. "I don't know him." I lied, though my voice shook. "I'm just a waitress." "You're the bait," Kong corrected me. He reached out and grabbed my arm. His grip was like a steel trap. Ryu would walk into a burning building to find the girl who saved his life. "I'm just going to make sure the building is ready for him." "Let go of my mama," Lily screamed, kicking at the man's leg. Kong looked down at her and sneered. "The kid comes too. She'll make Ryu even more desperate. Load them up." One of the other men grabbed me from behind, lifting me off my feet. I fought and kicked, screaming for help, but the warehouse district was empty. No one was coming to save us. They shoved us into the back of the silver car and slammed the door. The child safety locks clicked into place with a sound that felt like a prison door closing. As the car sped away, I looked out the window at the gray city. I had spent my whole life trying to keep Lily safe from the world of the Mafia, but now we were right in the middle of a war. Kong was the wrong hunter, but he was just as dangerous as Ryu. He didn't want to find me. He wanted to destroy the man I had saved. And as the car turned into the darkness, I realized that the only person who could save us now was the very man I was trying to escape. I had saved Ryu Sung-ho's life, and now I had to pray he was obsessed enough to come and save mine. The silver car stopped in front of the crumbling apartment building where I had spent the last 3 years hiding. Kang's men pushed Lily and me out of the back seat. The cold rain felt like needles on my skin. I looked up at my window, the one where I used to watch the world go by, and felt a deep sense of dread. This was supposed to be my safe place, but now it was a trap. "Go on, move," Kong growled, shoving me toward the entrance. He held a heavy gun in his hand, and his eyes were darting around the street. He was nervous, like a dog that knew a bigger predator was nearby. He wanted us inside, away from the streetlights, so he could set his trap in the dark. We reached the front door of my apartment, and my hands shook so much I could barely hold the key. Lily was crying quietly, her small face tucked into the side of my leg. Just as the lock clicked open, the air in the hallway changed. It didn't smell like old dust or damp wood anymore. It smelled like expensive tobacco and cold, mountain air. It was a scent I would know anywhere. "Step away from the door," a voice commanded. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the sound of the rain like a knife. I turned my head and saw him. Ryu Sung-ho was standing at the end of the hall. He wasn't in a car, and he wasn't surrounded by 20 men. He stood there alone, his black coat dripping with water, his jaw set in a hard, angry line. His eyes weren't on Kong. They were fixed on me, checking for bruises, checking to see if I was still whole. Kong laughed, but it sounded shaky. "You actually came alone, Ryu. I heard you were obsessed, but I didn't think you were this stupid. One move, and the girl and her brat get it." Ryu didn't look at Kang's gun. He didn't even seem to care about the 2 other men moving in behind him. He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. "I told you to step away from her," Ryu said. His voice was lower now, vibrating with a rage I hadn't seen in the casino. Back then, he had been controlled. Now, he looked like a man who was ready to tear the world apart. "I mean it," Kong yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Stay back." Ryu didn't stay back. He moved faster than I thought a human could move. In one heartbeat, he was across the hall. He didn't use a gun. He grabbed Kang's wrist with a sickening crack, and the silver gun hit the floor. Ryu didn't stop there. He wasn't the polished boss anymore. He was a force of nature. He threw a punch that sent Kong flying against the wall, then turned and kicked the second man before he could even raise his weapon. The controlled kingpin was gone. Ryu was fighting with a wild, desperate energy, his eyes glowing with fury. Every time Kong tried to get up, Ryu was there, hitting harder, his face twisted in a look of pure hate. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about the city. It was about the fact that these men had touched the only person who had ever seen him as a human being. "Please, stop," I screamed, pulling Lily into the corner. Ryu froze. He had Kong pinned against the doorframe, his hand wrapped around the man's throat. He looked back at me, and for a second, the rage stayed in his eyes. Then he saw Lily. He saw her small, terrified face, and the way she was shaking. Slowly, his fingers loosened. He dropped Kong like a piece of trash. Ryu stood up and straightened his coat. His knuckles were bleeding, and his breath was coming in heavy heaves, but the madness was fading. He walked over to us, stepping over the groaning men on the floor. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow falling over me. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was soft now, almost like he was afraid of scaring me. "No," y whispered, gloating Lily. Ryu looked down at Lily, then back at me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, green plastic dinosaur. He held it out to me on his palm. "You dropped this," he said. I looked at the toy, then at the man who had just dismantled 3 attackers with his bare hands to save us. The secret I had been keeping about Jean, about Lily, about why I ran, felt like it was about to burst out of me. Ryu Sung-ho hadn't just found a waitress. He had found his heart, and I realized with a shiver that he was never going to let us leave this hallway again. The hallway fell into a heavy, ringing silence. The only sounds left were the rain drumming on the roof and the soft, ragged breathing of the men Ryu had knocked down. Ryu stood there, tall and still, looking at me and Lily. He wasn't the scary monster who had just fought 3 men anymore. He looked like a man who was waiting for a door to open. "Come inside," Ryu said quietly. It wasn't an order this time. It was an invitation. I picked up Lily and walked into my small apartment. Ryu followed us and closed the door, locking it with a click that felt very final. He didn't sit down. He stood in the middle of my tiny living room, looking at the cracked walls and the mismatched furniture. He looked too big and too expensive for a place like this. He looked like a king standing in a shed. Ryu reached into his coat and pulled out 2 things. He placed them on my small kitchen table. The first was a heavy black bag. When it hit the wood, I heard the muffled thump of paper. I knew what was inside. It was enough money to change my life. It was enough to buy a house in a different state, a new car, and a future where I never had to serve a drink again. The second thing he placed on the table was a small, gold key with his family's crest on it. "You have a choice, Amelia," Ryu said. He leaned against the wall, his dark eyes watching me closely. "I found out who you are. I know about Jean. I know he was one of my men, and I know he died for me. That makes you, and the girl, part of my family, whether you want to be or not." I felt my breath catch in my throat. I looked at the bag of cash and then at the key. "The money is yours if you want to run," Ryu continued. His voice was steady, but there was a strange tightness in it. "You can take the girl and go anywhere. I will make sure no one follows you. You can be invisible again. You can have the quiet life you've been working so hard for." "And the key?" I whispered. "The key is for a home in my compound," he said. "It means my protection. It means Lily will never be cold or hungry again. It means no one like Kong will ever dare to touch you. But it also means you stay. It means you belong to my world." I looked at the bag of money. It was the exit I had always wanted. I could run away from the blood and the shadows. I could leave the memory of Jin's death behind. But then I looked at Ryu. I remembered the way he had fought for us. I remembered the way he had held that plastic dinosaur like it was the most important thing in the world. If I took the money, I would be safe, but I would be alone. If I took the key, I would be stepping into the fire, but I would have a lion at my side. I looked at Lily, who had stopped crying and was staring at the gold key. She didn't understand the danger, but she understood that for the first time in years, her mother wasn't the only one standing between her and the dark. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. You don't owe me anything. I just kissed you to save a life. Ryu took a step toward me. He didn't stop until he was inches away. He smelled like the rain and the cold city. Because for 5 seconds in that casino, I wasn't a boss or a target, he said, his voice dropping to a low murmur. I was just a man. You saw me when I was weak, and you didn't run. I've spent my whole life being feared, Amelia. I think I'd like to see what it's like to be saved by you instead. The price of safety was a heavy one. One choice led to a lonely freedom. The other led to a golden cage where the king himself held the door open. I looked at the money. Then I looked at the man who had turned the city upside down just to find a girl with a stained apron. My hand reached out, trembling only a little, and my fingers closed around the cold, heavy metal of the gold key. Ryu didn't smile, but the tension in his shoulders finally vanished. He reached out and touched my cheek with his bruised hand. Good choice, he whispered. The city won't touch you ever again. The gold key felt heavy in my hand, a cold promise of a life I never thought I would have. Ryu stood there for a long moment, his eyes searching my face. The room was still dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights outside, but I could see him clearly now. The anger from the hallway was gone. The king, he let out a short, dry laugh that didn't sound happy. But that was a lie. I've had people save my life before. Bodyguards take bullets for me every year. I never went looking for them. I never turned a city upside down for them. I held Lily closer as she drifted off to sleep against my shoulder. Then why did you come? I asked. Ryu finally looked up. His dark eyes were soft, and for the first time, the distance between us felt smaller. Because when you pulled me down in that casino, you didn't look at me like I was a boss. You didn't look at me like I was a monster or a paycheck. You were just a girl who was scared, but you were more worried about my life than your own. You touched me, Amelia, and you weren't afraid of the shadow I cast. He took a step back toward the door. I expected him to tell me to pack my bags. I expected him to lead us out to those black SUVs and lock us away in his world of gold and stone. But he didn't. He put his hand on the door handle and looked at me with a look that felt like a goodbye and a hello all at once. I'm leaving 2 of my best men at the bottom of the stairs, he said. They aren't there to watch you. They are there to make sure the world stays away. Take tonight. Say goodbye to this place. A car will be here at dawn to take you to the compound. I realized then that the unfinished kiss from the casino wasn't just a trick to hide from a gunman. It was the moment Ryu Sung-ho realized he was lonely. He wasn't obsessed with me because I was a waitress or a widow. He was obsessed because I was the only person in 10 years who had treated him like a man instead of a kingpin. Ryu, I called out before he could open the door. He paused, his back to me. Thank you, I whispered, for the dinosaur, and for the choice. He didn't turn around, but I saw his head tilt just a little, acknowledging my words. Then he stepped out into the hallway and closed the door. I heard his heavy footsteps fade away, followed by the sound of a powerful car engine starting up on the street below. I sat down on my small bed, holding Lily tight. I looked at the gold key and the bag of cash. Tomorrow, I would no longer be the invisible waitress. I wouldn't be the girl hiding in the gray, praying that the world wouldn't notice her. I was stepping into the light of a dangerous man's world. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a woman who had saved the devil, and in return, the devil had given me the keys to his kingdom. As the sun began to peek through the gray clouds of the city, I knew my life would never be quiet again. But as I looked at the gold key, I wasn't afraid. For the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere, even if that place was right in the heart of the storm.